$1,000. To the man in the charcoal suit, it was nothing, a rounding error, a forgotten tip. But to Sophie Miller, staring at the stack of bills left on table 4, it was a miracle. It was rent. It was medicine. It was life. Most people would have pocketed it. Most people would have walked away. But Sophie didn't. She made a choice in that split second that would drag her from her invisible life of poverty straight into the violent crosshairs of the city's most ruthless crime syndicate. She did the one thing the mafia never expects. And that choice? It didn't just change her life. It started a war. The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. That's how it felt to Sophie Miller on a Tuesday night in November. She was 24 years old, but her knees felt 60, and her eyes carried bags that no amount of drugstore concealer could hide. She worked at Sal's All-Nighter, a diner that sat like a bruise on the corner of 4th and Pike. The neon sign buzzed with an irritating hum that seemed to vibrate right in Sophie's molars. It was 11:45 p.m. Her shift ended in 15 minutes, but her anxiety wasn't on the clock. It was a 24/7 companion. In her apron pocket, vibrating against her hip every 10 minutes, was her phone. She didn't need to look at it to know who it was. The voicemail from the landlord, Mr. Henderson, was already seared into her brain. "Sophie, I'm not running a charity. You're 2 months behind. You have until Friday, or I'm putting your mother's hospital bed on the curb. Don't test me. Friday was tomorrow." "Sophie, table 4 needs a refill. Stop daydreaming or I'll dock your tips," Sal barked from the grill. He was a man made entirely of grease and bad attitude. "Coming, Sal," Sophie murmured, grabbing the coffee pot. Table 4 was usually occupied by Old Man Jenkins, who nursed a single cup of decaf for 3 hours. But tonight, Jenkins wasn't there. Instead, there was a man who looked like he had taken a wrong turn out of a luxury car commercial and ended up in hell. He was terrifyingly handsome, in a way that made you want to look away rather than stare. He wore a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Sophie made in a year. The fabric was impeccable, dry despite the torrential downpour outside. His hair was dark, slicked back, and his eyes were focused on a phone resting on the sticky table surface. He didn't look like a customer. He looked like a shark swimming in a goldfish bowl. "Coffee, sir?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling slightly. The man didn't look up. He just tapped a finger on the mug. Sophie poured. Her hand shook, and a tiny drop of hot coffee splashed onto the pristine white cuff of his shirt. Sophie froze. The diner went silent. Even the hum of the neon sign seemed to stop. I am so sorry," Sophie stammered, grabbing a napkin. "I'll get club soda. I can get that out." The man finally looked up. His eyes were the color of ice. There was no anger in them, which was worse. There was just a profound, chilling indifference. He looked at her the way a butcher looks at a side of beef, evaluating, cold, detached. "Leave it," he said. His voice was low, a baritone that vibrated through the table. "Sir, really, I said leave it," he repeated. He glanced at his watch, a heavy platinum piece. "Check." Sophie scrambled to write the check. That's $8.50, sir." He didn't reach for a wallet. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a money clip that was thick with cash. He peeled off a 20, dropped it on the table, and stood up. He was tall, looming over her. The air around him smelled of expensive tobacco, rain, and something metallic, like gun oil. "Keep the change," he said. And then his phone buzzed. He answered it immediately, his face hardening. "I told you, the shipment stays at the docks until I say otherwise. If Dominic touches it, I'll burn his house down with him inside." He turned on his heel and strode out the door, the bell jingling cheerfully in his wake. Sophie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She reached for the $20 bill and the empty mug to clear the table. That's when she saw it. Tucked underneath the napkin dispenser, partially obscured by the sugar caddy, was a thick envelope. It must have slid out of his jacket when he reached for the money clip. It was plain manila, unsealed. Sophie looked at the door. The man was gone. She looked at Sal. He was scraping the grill, back turned. She picked up the envelope. It felt heavy. Curiosity, that dangerous instinct, took over. She peeked inside. Her heart stopped. It was cash. $100 bills. Stacks of them. It had to be $10,000. Maybe more. Sophie's world narrowed down to that envelope. Mr. Henderson, the eviction, her mother's surgery, the debt collectors calling at 3 a.m. $10,000. No one saw him leave it. There were no cameras in Sal's. He was too cheap for that. The man was clearly a criminal. Who else carries that kind of cash and talks about burning houses down? If she kept it, she wasn't stealing from a saint. She was stealing from a sinner to save her mother. Take it, a voice whispered in her head. Just take it. He won't even miss it. He treated that 20 like it was trash. She shoved the envelope under her apron. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could walk out the back door right now. She could pay Mr. Henderson in cash tonight. She could buy her mum the good pain meds, the ones insurance wouldn't cover. But then she remembered his eyes. Cold, indifferent. If Dominic touches it, I'll burn his house down with him inside. If a man like that found out she took his money, he wouldn't sue her. He wouldn't call the police. He would come for her, and he would find her. Sophie looked at the clock. 11:58 p.m. She looked at the money. Then she looked at the door where the man had vanished into the rain. Fear was a powerful motivator, but desperation was stronger. Yet, underneath the desperation, Sophie had a spine of steel she didn't even know existed. She wasn't a thief. "Sal, I'm taking my break," she yelled. "You got 2 minutes left," Sal shouted back. Sophie didn't listen. She grabbed her coat, clutched the envelope against her chest like a shield, and ran out into the storm. The Seattle rain hit her like a physical blow, soaking her thin uniform instantly. The street was dark, the streetlights reflecting in the puddles like smeared oil paintings. She scanned the street. There, half a block down, idling at a red light, was a sleek black sedan. It was a Maybach. Sophie knew cars because her father had been a mechanic before the accident. That car cost more than the entire city block she lived on. The taillights were glowing red. The light was about to turn green. Sophie ran. She ran in her worn-out sneakers, her feet splashing through freezing puddles. "Hey, sir, wait!" she screamed. But her voice was swallowed by the wind and the traffic. The light turned green. The car began to roll forward. "No, no, no," Sophie gasped. She pushed herself harder, her lungs burning. She cut across the sidewalk, nearly slipping on a discarded newspaper, and sprinted into the middle of the intersection. She waved her arms frantically. The car stopped. It didn't screech. It just ceased moving with predatory grace. Sophie reached the passenger side window, gasping for air, water streaming down her face, hair plastered to her skull. She bent over, hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. The window rolled down. Not all the way. Just 3 inches. A face appeared. It wasn't the man from the diner. It was a driver, a massive wall of muscle with a shaved head and a scar running through his eyebrow. He looked at her like she was a bug on the windshield. "Get lost," the driver growled. "We don't have change." "No," Sophie wheezed. "The man. Inside. He left something." The driver hesitated. He glanced into the rear-view mirror. A second later, the back window rolled down. The man in the grey suit was sitting there. He was holding a tumbler of amber liquid. He looked at Sophie, shivering in the rain, with mild annoyance. "You?" he said. The recognition was barely there. The waitress who spilled the coffee. "You left this," Sophie said. She pulled the damp manila envelope from under her coat. She held it out through the rain. The man stared at the envelope. Then he looked at her face. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. It wasn't gratitude. It was confusion. He pressed a button and the door clicked unlocked. "Get in," he commanded. "What?" "No, I just wanted to return." I said, "Get in. Unless you want to discuss my business in the middle of an intersection while half of Seattle watches." Sophie looked around. A car behind them honked. She looked at the envelope in her hand, then at the dark, leather-clad interior of the car. Every instinct screamed run, but she was already wet, cold, and honestly, she was tired of being afraid of everything. She opened the door and slid onto the plush leather seat. The car was warm. It smelled of rich leather and that same metallic cologne. The door locked automatically with a heavy thud that felt final. The car began to move. "Sir, please, I have to get back to work," Sophie said, her voice small in the quiet cabin. The man ignored her. He took the envelope from her hand. He didn't count it. He just weighed it in his palm. "Why?" he asked. He turned to face her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His jawline was sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes were intelligent, probing. "Why what?" "Why bring it back? You looked inside. I saw the way your eyes dilated in the diner. You know how much is in here. $10,000. "It's not mine," Sophie said simply. "Everyone has a price, Sophie," he said. He knew her name. He must have read her name tag. 10 grand is a lot of price for a waitress at Sal's. You could have paid off your debts, fixed your teeth, moved out of the dumps. Sophie bristled. "My teeth are fine, and I'm not a thief." "Everyone is a thief when they're desperate enough," he countered smoothly. "So tell me the truth. Did you bring it back because you're a saint, or because you thought I'd come back for it and hurt you?" "I brought it back because I didn't earn it," Sophie snapped. The fear was giving way to irritation, and because my mother raised me better than that. Now if you're done psychoanalyzing me, can you let me out? I'm going to get fired. The man stared at her for a long, uncomfortable silence. The car was speeding up, heading toward the highway on-ramp. "Stop the car," the man said to the driver. The driver pulled over immediately onto the shoulder of the dark road. "You're an anomaly, Sophie Miller," the man said. "I don't like anomalies. They're unpredictable." He opened the envelope and pulled out a single stack of bills, $1,000. "For your trouble," he said, holding it out. Sophie looked at the money. God, she needed it. But taking it now felt wrong. It felt like hush money, even though she didn't know what she was hushing. "No, thank you," she said. "I didn't do it for a reward." The man laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. A recusant waitress. Now I've seen everything. He shoved the money into her wet apron pocket before she could protest. "Take it. Consider it a tip for the coffee you didn't spill on my pants." "Who are you?" Sophie asked, her hand hovering over the pocket. "My name is Silas," he said. "Silas Vane." The blood drained from Sophie's face. Everyone in the city knew the name Vane. The Vane family wasn't just the mafia. They were the architects of the city's underworld. They owned the docks, the construction unions, the politicians. Silas Vane was the eldest son. The rumors said he had killed a man when he was 16, just for scratching his father's car. She was sitting in a car with the devil. "Silas," she whispered. "Get out, Sophie," Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous chill. "Before I change my mind about letting you go." Sophie scrambled for the door handle. She practically fell out of the car onto the wet pavement. As she slammed the door, the window rolled down one last time. "Sophie," Silas called out. She froze. "You didn't see me tonight. You didn't find any money. And you certainly didn't get in this car. Do we understand each other?" "Yes," she squeaked. "Good. Because if you breathe a word of this, well, you heard what I said about burning houses down." The window rolled up. The Maybach peeled away, disappearing into the rainy night like a phantom. Sophie stood on the side of the highway, clutching the $1,000 in her pocket. She was soaking wet, terrified, and miles from the diner. She thought it was over. She thought she had survived her brush with the darkness. She was wrong. As she began the long walk back to the city, a grey van slowed down behind her. She didn't hear the side door slide open over the sound of the rain. She didn't feel the needle go into her neck until the world started to spin. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her completely was a pair of boots hitting the pavement, boots that were muddy, worn, and definitely not Italian leather. Silas Vane wasn't the only monster in the city, and by returning his money, Sophie had just walked onto the battlefield between them. Sophie woke up to the smell of rust and stale seawater. Her head felt like it had been split open with an axe. She tried to move her hands and found them zip-tied to the arms of a metal chair. She blinked her eyes open. The room was dim, illuminated by a single swinging bulb. It looked like a storage container or a warehouse office. Dust motes danced in the yellow light. "She's awake." The voice was gravelly, distinct from Silas's smooth baritone. Sophie jerked her head up. Standing in front of her were 3 men. In the center was a man who looked like a bulldog in a cheap suit. He had a thick neck and a nose that had been broken so many times it looked like a zigzag. This was Dominic, the butcher, Rossi. Sophie recognized him from the news. He was the rival to the Vane family. The brute force to Vane's calculated precision. Where am I?" Sophie croaked. Her throat was dry. "You're in the deep end, sweetheart," Dominic grinned. His teeth were yellow. "Now, let's talk about your boyfriend, Silas." "I don't know him," Sophie panicked. "I just waited on him. I gave him his money back." "We know," Dominic said. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of garlic and sweat. "We were watching him. We've been watching Silas for weeks, waiting for him to make a drop. He left that envelope for a contact, a bribe for a judge. And you stupid little girl, you picked it up and ran it back to him." Sophie's stomach dropped. It wasn't a mistake. Silas hadn't lost the money. He had left it there on purpose. It was a drop, and she had ruined it. "I didn't know," Sophie cried. "I thought he forgot it." Dominic laughed, but it wasn't amused. "Because you interfered, the judge didn't get his payment. The deal fell through. Silas is vulnerable right now, and you're the only person who got close to him tonight. You sat in his car. You talked to him." Dominic leaned in, his face inches from hers. "What did he tell you?" "Nothing. He just told me to get out." "Ah, liar," Dominic hissed. He backhanded her. The force of the blow knocked the chair sideways. Sophie screamed as she hit the concrete floor, pain exploding in her cheekbone. "Pick her up," Dominic ordered. The 2 goons hauled the chair back upright. Sophie was sobbing now, tears mixing with the blood from her split lip. "Silas Vane is a paranoid man," Dominic said, pacing the room. "He doesn't let strangers into his Maybach, unless they're useful. Or unless he trusts them. Which one is it, Sophie?" "Neither. Please, I just want to go home to my mum." Dominic paused. He pulled a knife from his belt. It was a wicked, curved blade. "Here's how this works," Dominic said softly. "You're going to be our little message. We're going to send a video to Silas. You're going to tell him that you work for us now, that you stole the drop money for us." "But I didn't." "It doesn't matter what's true," Dominic smiled. "It matters what he believes. If he thinks you betrayed him, he'll come for you. And when he comes for you, we'll be waiting to put a bullet in his pretty head." He held the knife to her throat. The metal was cold. "So smile for the camera, Sophie. You're about to become famous." One of the goons pulled out a smartphone and started recording. "Say it," Dominic commanded, pressing the blade enough to draw a bead of blood. "Say, 'Silas, thanks for the cash. Dominic sends his regards.'" Sophie looked at the camera lens. She thought about her mum, alone in their apartment, waiting for her to come home. She thought about Silas Vane's cold eyes. If she did this, Silas would kill her. If she didn't, Dominic would kill her right now. She took a shaky breath. "Silas," she whimpered into the camera. I... She couldn't do it. She couldn't lie. Not when the lie would start a war. She stared straight into the lens, her eyes blazing with sudden defiance. "Silas, it's a trap. He wants to kill you. Don't come. Turn." Dominic roared in fury. "Cut the feed!" He turned on Sophie, face purple with rage. "You stupid bitch!" He raised the knife. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the end. Crash! The metal door of the warehouse exploded inward. A cloud of smoke and debris filled the room. Through the smoke, silhouettes moved with terrifying speed. The sound of suppressed gunfire, thwip, 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 echoed off the metal walls. Dominic's two goons dropped to the floor before they could even draw their weapons. Dominic spun around, holding Sophie as a human shield, the knife pressed hard against her jugular. "Back off!" Dominic screamed. "I'll slit her throat, I swear to God!" The smoke cleared slowly. Standing in the jagged opening of the door, flanked by 4 men with assault rifles, was Silas Vane. He wasn't wearing the grey suit anymore. He was wearing tactical black gear, a pistol in his hand. He looked like the angel of death. "Let her go, Dominic," Silas said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. "You ruined everything, Vane," Dominic spat. "This city was supposed to be mine." "It was never yours. You're a bottom feeder," Silas said calmly. He took a step forward. "Stay back." Dominic pressed the knife harder. Sophie felt a warm trickle of blood run down her neck. She gasped. Silas's eyes locked onto Sophie's. For a microsecond, the ice in them cracked. He saw the blood. He saw the terror. And he saw the defiance she had shown on the camera feed his hackers had intercepted just moments ago. She warned him. She faced death to warn him. "Sophie," Silas said, his voice strangely gentle, "close your eyes." Sophie didn't question him. She squeezed her eyes shut. Bang! A single thunderous shot rang out. The grip on her neck loosened instantly. She felt a heavy weight slump against the back of her chair, then slide to the floor. Silence returned to the warehouse. "Cut her loose," Silas ordered. Sophie felt hands on her wrists. The zip ties were snipped. She opened her eyes. Dominic was on the ground, a neat hole in the center of his forehead. Silas was holstering his weapon. He walked over to her. He took off his tactical gloves and reached out, his thumb gently wiping the blood from the cut on her neck. His touch was surprisingly warm. "You warned me," he said, sounding genuinely baffled. "Why?" Sophie looked up at him, trembling uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was fading. Because I'm not a thief," she whispered, "and I'm not a liar." Silas stared at her. The calculation was gone from his face, replaced by something intense, something dangerous in a different way. "Possession." "No," he murmured. "You're certainly not." He scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "Where are you taking me?" Sophie asked weakly, her head resting against his chest. "You saved my life, Sophie. And you just started a war with the Rossi crime family. You can't go back to your diner. You can't go back to your apartment." He walked out into the cool night air, toward a waiting armored SUV. "You belong to me now," Silas said, "until I say it's safe." Sophie didn't know if that was a promise or a threat. As the doors closed, sealing them in together, she realized she had left her old life behind forever. The poor waitress was gone. Who she would become next was entirely up to the mafia boss sitting beside her. Sophie woke up in a bed that was larger than her entire apartment. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, cool and impossibly soft against her skin. The smell of rust and blood was gone, replaced by the scent of lavender and rain. She sat up, wincing. Her body ached. A deep, bruising soreness that radiated from her ribs to her neck. She looked down. She was wearing a silk pajama set in slate grey. Her old grease-stained uniform was nowhere to be seen. "You're awake." Sophie jumped. Silas was sitting in a velvet armchair in the corner of the room, reading a tablet. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that were corded with muscle and marked with faint, jagged scars. He looked less like a monster this morning, and more like a weary king. "Where am I?" Sophie asked, pulling the duvet up to her chin. "The penthouse," Silas said simply. "Top floor of the Vane Tower. It's the safest place in Seattle, or at least it's supposed to be." He stood up and walked over to the bed. He moved with a prowling grace that made Sophie's breath hitch. He sat on the edge of the mattress, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck," Sophie admitted, "and then dropped off a cliff. The doctor says you have bruised ribs and a mild concussion." "Dominic." He was heavy-handed. Silas's eyes darkened at the name. "He's no longer a problem." "I saw," Sophie whispered. The memory of the gunshot was vivid. "You killed him." "He was going to kill you," Silas said, his voice void of apology. It was a simple equation. Sophie looked around the opulent room. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the Seattle skyline, grey and weeping with rain. "So what now? Can I go home?" Silas sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sophie, you don't seem to understand the gravity of what happened last night. Dominic Rossi wasn't just a thug. He was the head of a family. His brother, Luca Rossi, is now in charge. Luca is smarter, meaner, and far more vindictive. You are the woman who lured his brother into a trap. You are the face of his humiliation. I didn't lure him. I was kidnapped. Luca won't care about the details. He will want blood. If you go back to your apartment, you will be dead within the hour." Sophie felt the panic rising again. "But my mom. I can't leave her. She's sick. She can't walk. If I'm not there to give her meds, to help her to the bathroom." She tried to scramble out of bed, ignoring the pain in her ribs. "I have to go to her." Silas put a hand on her shoulder, gently pushing her back down. "Relax, it's handled." "What do you mean, handled?" "Your mother, Martha Miller. Stage 4 rheumatoid arthritis and early onset heart failure. She was moved 3 hours ago to the St. Jude private care facility on the east side." Sophie stared at him, mouth agape. You kidnapped my mother." "I relocated her," Silas corrected. "She is in a private suite. She has 2 nurses assigned to her 24 hours a day. The best rheumatologist in the state is reviewing her file as we speak. And there are 2 armed guards outside her door who are paid very well to make sure no one named Rossi gets within a mile of her." Sophie was stunned. St. Jude's was the kind of place senators sent their parents. It cost thousands of dollars a night. "Why?" she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "Why would you do that?" Silas looked away, staring out at the rain-streaked window. He looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "You saved my life, Sophie. I pay my debts. And besides," he looked back at her, his gaze intense, "I couldn't have you worrying about her while you're staying here. Distractions get people killed." "Staying here?" Sophie repeated. "For how long?" "Until the war is over," Silas said grimly. "Until every Rossi is either in jail or in the ground. You are my guest, Sophie, or my prisoner, depending on how you look at it. But you are under my protection." He stood up and walked to the door. "There are clothes in the closet. My stylist guessed your size. Breakfast is in the kitchen. Do not leave this floor. The elevator requires a retinal scan that only I have." "Silas," she called out before he could leave. He paused, hand on the doorknob. "Thank you," she said softly. "For my mum." Silas didn't turn around. "Don't thank me yet, Sophie. Being in my world is not a gift. It's a curse." He closed the door. For the next 2 weeks, Sophie lived in a golden cage. The penthouse was magnificent, a sprawling fortress of glass and steel. But it was lonely. Silas was gone most of the day, managing the fallout of Dominic's death. The war he had predicted had begun. Sophie spent her days wandering the rooms, reading books from the massive library, and worrying. She called her mum every day on a secure line Silas provided. Her mum sounded happier than she had in years, raving about the food and the soft pillows at the clinic. She thought Sophie had gotten a high-paying job as a traveling assistant. Sophie didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. Silas started coming home earlier. He would find her in the kitchen, trying to cook pasta because she was tired of the chef's fancy meals. He would sit at the island, loosening his tie, and watch her. They started talking, not about the war or the money, but about real things. Sophie told him about her dad, about dropping out of college to care for her mum, about her dream of opening a bakery. Silas told her, hesitantly at first, about the pressure of the family legacy, about the brother he lost to an overdose, about how tired he was of the violence. Sophie saw the man beneath the suit. He wasn't the monster everyone feared. He was a man who had been forced into a mold he hated, holding up the sky for everyone who depended on him. And Silas saw her. He saw her kindness, her sharp wit, her refusal to be intimidated by his wealth. One night, finding her asleep on the sofa with a book on her chest, Silas stood over her for a long time. He reached out, his fingers hovering over her cheek, terrified to touch her, terrified that his darkness would smudge her light. "You're the only real thing I've ever found," he whispered to the sleeping room. But in the shadows of the hallway, watching this tender moment, was another pair of eyes. Eyes filled with jealousy and calculation. It was Arthur, Silas's consigliere, a man who had served Silas's father, a man who believed that weakness was a disease. And in Sophie Miller, he saw a fatal infection that needed to be cut out. The peace broke on a Thursday. Sophie was in the library, humming to herself as she organized the books by color, a nervous habit she couldn't shake. The elevator chimed and Silas stormed in. But something was wrong. Usually when he came home, his shoulders dropped. He relaxed. Today he radiated a tension so sharp it made the air crackle. Behind him walked Arthur. Arthur was a thin, severe man with silver hair and a face like a hatchet. He was holding a file folder. "Silas?" Sophie asked, stepping out of the library. "Is everything okay?" Silas stopped in the middle of the living room. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. "Pack your things," Silas said. His voice was ice, cold, dead. Just like the night she met him. Sophie froze. "What?" I said, "Pack your things. You're leaving." "I don't understand. Is it safe? Is the war over?" Silas finally turned to her. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a mixture of rage and profound betrayal. "The war isn't over, but your part in it is." He snatched the file from Arthur and threw it across the room. Papers scattered across the marble floor like dead leaves. "Read it!" Silas roared. Sophie trembled. She knelt and picked up a piece of paper. It was a bank statement, a wire transfer receipt. It showed a transfer of $50,000 into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account was under the name Sophie Miller. The source of the funds, Rossi Construction Limited. I don't know what this is," Sophie stammered. "I don't have an offshore account. I've never been to the Cayman Islands." "Don't lie to me," Silas shouted, stepping closer. He looked like he was fighting the urge to destroy everything in the room. "Arthur found it. Encrypted comms on your phone. You've been sending them my schedule. You told them about the warehouse drop. That's how Dominic knew to be there." "No!" Sophie screamed, tears streaming down her face. "That's crazy. I warned you. I saved you." "The perfect cover," Arthur interjected smoothly. His voice was oily. "Get captured, play the victim, save the boss to earn his trust. Then, once you're inside the fortress, you feed Luca Rossi everything he needs to dismantle us from the inside. It's a classic honey trap." "Silas, please," Sophie begged, reaching for his arm. "Look at me. You know me. I wouldn't do this." Silas flinched away from her touch as if she were made of acid. "I thought I knew you," Silas said, his voice breaking. I actually thought, for the first time in my life, that I could trust someone who wasn't on the payroll. I let you in. I let you near my family's secrets. I protected your mother. My mother? Sophie gasped. If I was working for the Rosses, why would I let you take my mother? Leverage, Arthur answered, to make the con look real. Silas turned his back on her. He walked to the window, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I should kill you. The rules say I have to kill you. The room went silent. Sophie stopped breathing. But I can't, Silas whispered. God help me, I can't. He turned back, his face a mask of stone. Get out. Arthur will drive you to the city limits. You have 1 hour to disappear. If I see you in Seattle again, if I even hear your name, I won't hesitate next time. Silas, you're making a mistake, Sophie cried. Arthur is lying. He's setting me up. Arthur grabbed Sophie's arm. His grip was bruising. Come on, traitor. You heard the boss. He dragged her toward the elevator. Sophie dug her heels in, looking back at Silas, begging him with her eyes to see the truth. But Silas didn't look up. He was staring at the floor, at the fake bank statement that had broken his heart. Arthur shoved Sophie into the elevator and pressed the button for the garage. As the doors slid shut, cutting off her view of Silas, Arthur leaned in close to her ear. You were making him soft, Arthur hissed. A soft boss is a dead boss. I did what I had to do to save the family. Sophie's eyes widened. You forged it. Arthur smiled, a thin, cruel-lipped smile. Of course I did. And tonight, while he's grieving his little betrayal, Luca Rossi is going to hit the shipment at the West Docks. Silas will be too distracted to see it coming. And when Silas falls, I'll be there to pick up the pieces, Sophie gasped. It wasn't just about getting rid of her. Arthur was working with the Rosses. He was the real traitor. You're going to kill him, she whispered. No, my dear. Luca is going to kill him. I'm just opening the door. The elevator dinged, the garage level. Arthur shoved her toward a waiting sedan. Get in. I'm dropping you at the bus station. If you're smart, you'll catch the first ride to Idaho and never look back. Sophie sat in the back of the car, her mind racing. She was being discarded. She was safe. She could leave. She could run away and start over. But she thought of Silas. She thought of the man who had sat on the edge of her bed and told her she was the only real thing he'd found. She thought of him up there in the tower, believing she had betrayed him, walking blindly into a trap at the West Docks. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a hero. She was a waitress. But she loved him. The realization hit her harder than Dominic's fist. She loved the mafia boss, and she wasn't going to let him die. Arthur dropped her at the Greyhound station on Stewart Street. He didn't even watch her go inside. He just sped off, eager to get back to the slaughter he had orchestrated. Sophie stood on the curb in the rain. She had no money, no phone, just the clothes on her back, the expensive designer jeans and sweater Silas had bought her. She looked at a clock in the station window. 8 p.m. Arthur had said the shipment was at the West Docks. Tonight. She had to warn him. But she couldn't call him. Arthur would screen the calls or Silas wouldn't answer. She had to go there. She ran to a taxi stand. Please, she told the driver. West Docks, Pier 91. You got cash? The driver asked suspiciously. Sophie pulled off the diamond bracelet Silas had given her, just because, a week ago. It was worth more than the taxi. Take this, she said. Just drive, fast. The driver's eyes bugged out. Yes, ma'am. The drive felt like an eternity. Sophie stared out the window, watching the city blur. Please be late, she prayed. Please let me get there before the shooting starts. When they reached the industrial district, the roads became dark and empty. Warehouses loomed like skeletons. This is as far as I go, the driver said, pulling up to the chain-link fence of the shipping yard. I ain't getting involved in whatever happens back there. Sophie jumped out. She could hear it already. The sound of shouting, engines revving. She squeezed through a gap in the fence she remembered from when her dad worked down here years ago. She ran through the maze of shipping containers, following the noise. She emerged into a clearing near the water. It was chaos. Silas was there. He was pinned down behind his black SUV. His men were outnumbered. On the other side of the clearing, heavily armed men wearing red armbands, Rossi's colours, were advancing. And there, standing on a catwalk above the fray, was Luca Rossi. He was firing an assault rifle, laughing. But where was Arthur? Sophie scanned the shadows. She saw him. Arthur was standing near the back of Silas's formation, hiding behind a crate. He wasn't firing at the Rossis. He was raising his gun, aiming it at Silas's exposed back. Silas was focused on Luca. He didn't see the knife in his own house. "Silas!" Sophie screamed. Her voice tore through the noise of the gunfire. Silas turned. He saw her. He looked confused, then horrified. "Sophie, get out of here!" In that split second of distraction, Arthur fired. But Sophie was already moving. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She just threw herself forward. She sprinted across the open ground. As Arthur pulled the trigger, Sophie launched herself at Silas, shoving him hard to the side. The bullet meant for Silas's heart didn't miss. It hit Sophie. The impact spun her around. It felt like being punched by a giant, followed by a burning, searing heat in her shoulder. She collapsed onto the wet concrete. "No!" Silas's scream was a sound of pure, animalistic agony. Time seemed to stop. Silas caught her before her head hit the ground. He looked at the blood spreading across her chest. Then he looked up and saw Arthur, gun still raised, smoke drifting from the barrel. The betrayal registered instantly. The realization of what Sophie had done, what she had sacrificed, crashed into him. Silas' veins snapped. He didn't take cover. He stood up, fully exposed, a pistol in each hand. His face was a mask of absolute, terrifying fury. He shot Arthur first. One clean shot between the eyes. The traitor fell without a sound. Then Silas turned on the Rossis. He walked forward, firing with a precision that was supernatural. He was a reaper. He didn't care if he lived or died. He just wanted to kill every single thing that had hurt her. His men, seeing their boss's berserker rage, rallied. They pushed forward, overwhelming the Rossi soldiers. Silas reached the catwalk. Luca Rossi tried to run, but Silas shot him in the leg. Luca fell. Silas stood over him, executed him with a single shot, and didn't even pause. He turned and sprinted back to where Sophie lay. She was pale, her breathing shallow. The rain was washing the blood away as fast as it flowed. Silas dropped to his knees, sliding in the mud. He gathered her into his arms, rocking her back and forth. "Sophie," he begged, his voice cracking. "Sophie, look at me. Stay with me." Her eyelids fluttered open. She looked at him, her eyes unfocused. "Arthur," she whispered, blood bubbling on her lips. "It was Arthur. I know, baby, I got him. I got them all," Silas sobbed, pressing his hand over her wound to staunch the flow. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you." "It's okay," she breathed. A faint smile touched her lips. "I told you, I'm not a thief." Her eyes rolled back. Her head lolled against his chest. "Medic!" Silas screamed at the sky, a sound that tore his throat raw. "Get a medic, now!" He pulled her closer, burying his face in her neck. The most powerful man in Seattle, clutching the waitress he had tried to throw away, praying to a god he hadn't spoken to in years. "Don't you dare die," he whispered fiercely. "I still owe you $1,000. The waiting room of Harborview Medical Center was a sterile purgatory. For 18 hours, Silas Vane had paced the length of the linoleum floor, his tactical gear replaced by a fresh suit that felt like a straitjacket. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. He had simply existed in a state of suspended terror, his mind replaying the moment the bullet hit her over and over again. The hospital was on lockdown. Silas's men were stationed at every exit, every elevator, and every stairwell. The doctors were terrified, not of the men with guns, but of the man in the charcoal suit who had told the chief of surgery, "If she dies, this hospital burns." At 4 a.m., the double doors swung open. Dr. Aris, a neurosurgeon with hands steady enough to defuse bombs, stepped out. He looked exhausted. Silas stopped pacing. He didn't speak. He couldn't. "She made it," Dr. Aris said, pulling off his surgical cap. The air left Silas's lungs in a rush. He staggered back a step, catching himself on a plastic chair. The relief was so violent it felt like physical pain. "The bullet missed the heart by centimeters," the doctor explained. "It shattered the clavicle and nicked the subclavian artery. We had to perform a massive transfusion. She's in a medically induced coma to let the swelling go down. But Silas, she's a fighter. I've never seen vitals stabilize that fast. When can I see her?" Silas rasped. "She needs rest. The ICU is—" Silas gave him a look that reminded the doctor exactly who owned the construction company that built this wing of the hospital. "Right this way, Mr. Vane," the doctor corrected himself. Silas walked into the dim room. The beeping of the monitors was the only sound. Sophie looked small in the hospital bed, swallowed by wires and tubes. Her skin was the color of paper. Silas pulled a chair to the bedside. He took her hand, the one that wasn't hooked up to an IV, and pressed it against his forehead. "I'm here," he whispered into her palm. "I'm not going anywhere." And he didn't. For 6 days, Sophie slept, and while she slept, Silas Vane went to work. But not with a gun. He worked with a phone and a pen. He dismantled the Rossi empire. With Luca dead and Dominic gone, the organization was headless. Silas absorbed their territories, not with violence, but with commerce. He bought their debts. He hired their soldiers. He turned the streets quiet. He visited Martha Miller at the private care facility. He sat by her bedside and listened to stories about Sophie as a little girl, how she used to save stray cats, how she worked 3 jobs in high school to pay the bills. He learned that the woman who saved his life had been saving people her whole life. On the 7th day, the rain stopped. The sun broke through the Seattle gray, casting a beam of light onto the hospital bed. Sophie's finger twitched. Silas, who was dozing in the chair, snapped awake instantly. "Sophie?" Her eyelashes fluttered. She groaned, a low sound of discomfort. Then her eyes opened. They were hazy, confused, but they found him immediately. "Silas!" she croaked. Her voice was wrecked from the intubation. "I'm here," he said, leaning in. "Don't try to talk. Just breathe." She blinked, memories flooding back. The docks, the gun, Arthur. "Did you—" she managed to whisper. "Are you okay?" Silas let out a choked laugh, tears spilling over his lashes. "Am I okay? You took a bullet for me, Sophie. You almost died. And you're asking if I'm okay?" "You looked sad," she mumbled. Silas kissed her knuckles over and over. "I'm not sad anymore. I'm yours. Do you hear me? I am entirely, completely yours." Sophie smiled weakly. "Does that mean I get a raise?" Silas laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that banished the shadows in the room. "We can discuss your compensation package later." 3 months later. The bell above the door at Sal's all-nighter jingled. Sal was behind the grill, scraping grease, miserable as always. The lunch rush was over, and the diner was empty, save for a few regulars. "We're closed for cleaning," Sal barked without looking up. "Funny," a deep voice said. "The sign says open 24 hours. Sal spun around, ready to yell. The color drained from his face. Silas Vane stood in the doorway, but he wasn't alone. Next to him, looking radiant in a cream-colored cashmere coat, was Sophie. Her arm was still in a sling, but she looked healthy, glowing. "Sophie," Sal stammered. I haven't seen you in months. You just walked out on a shift. I should have fired you." "Actually, Sal," Silas interjected, stepping forward. He placed a document on the counter. "You're the one being fired." "What?" Sal squinted at the paper. It was a deed of sale. "I bought the building," Silas said casually, "and the business this morning. Overpaid for it too, but I'm feeling generous." Sal looked from Silas to Sophie. You bought the diner." "Technically, I bought it," Silas said. He turned to Sophie. "But I'm gifting it to the new owner." Sophie looked at Silas, eyes wide. "You didn't." "You said you wanted to open a bakery." Silas shrugged. "This place has a great industrial oven. It just needs... well, it needs to be burned down and rebuilt, essentially. But the location is good." He turned back to Sal. "Pack your knives, Sal. You have 10 minutes." Sal didn't argue. He grabbed his coat and ran out the back door as if the devil himself were chasing him. Sophie walked behind the counter. She ran her hand over the chipped formica. This place had been her prison for years. Now, it was her kingdom. She looked at table 4, the table where it all started. Silas walked over to it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off 10 $100 bills. He fanned them out on the sticky table. "What are you doing?" Sophie asked, walking over to him. "Returning the investment," Silas said softly. He pulled her close with his free arm, careful of her injury. "That night," Silas said, looking deep into her eyes, "I left $1,000 on this table by mistake. I thought it was the worst mistake of my life when I realized it was gone. But it turns out it was the best deal I ever made." "Why?" Sophie asked, teasing him. "Because you got your money back?" "No." Silas leaned down, his lips brushing hers. "Because for $1,000, I bought a second chance at life, and I found a queen to rule this city with." Sophie smiled, threading her fingers through his hair. "I'm going to make this the best bakery in Seattle, Silas. I'm going to make you get fat on croissants." "I look forward to it," he murmured. He kissed her then. It wasn't the kiss of a mafia boss claiming a prize. It was the kiss of a man who had been lost in the dark for a long time, finally finding his way home. Outside, the rain began to fall on the Seattle streets. But inside the diner, under the buzzing neon light, everything was warm. The poor waitress had returned the money, but she had kept the heart of the man who left it. And that was a fortune no amount of money could buy. And that is the incredible story of Sophie Miller and Silas Vane. What started as a simple act of integrity, returning money that no one would have missed, spiraled into a saga of danger, betrayal, and ultimately love. It proves something powerful. Character is what you do when no one is looking. Sophie could have taken that $1,000 and fixed her short-term problems, but by choosing honesty, even when she was desperate, she didn't just save herself. She saved the one person who could save her back. In a world full of people taking shortcuts, sometimes the longest road is the only one that leads you home. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets us know you want more long-form stories like this one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share this video with a friend who loves a good romance with a twist. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.